Welcome to our webinar OT Asset Management Weekly, where we discuss topics around OT asset management. And it's actually more than one webinar, it's a webinar series. And we thought it would be a good idea to do this series, which occurs every week at the same time, every Tuesday morning, East Coast time in the US. We thought it would be a good idea because many people are still a little bit confused, I would say, what OT asset management really is. So you have heard a lot about OT security products, OT security strategies, risk management, etc. Whereas OT asset management seems to be more abstract. And we want to shed some light on this I won't say new topic, but let's just say lesser known topic. And we will certainly also take the opportunity to show you how it works when you want to implement OT asset management using the OT-based OT asset management software. So we will focus on different topics, but all of these topics have one thing in common. When you talk about OT asset management, it's basically that you are talking about properties of your OT assets, and you make a decision on what you see, how those properties are, is actually what you would like to see. And if there is a delta, then you certainly would undertake some efforts to move from the present state to the desired target state. And probably today's topic, OT vulnerability management, is a very good case in point, because trust me, once that you see your OT vulnerabilities, you will definitely want to move away from the state of affairs as it is, and you would want to see a better state of affairs. This is what we will be focusing on today. Now, how is OT vulnerability management related to OT asset management? That is actually very simple, because all the known vulnerabilities that you find referenced in the National Vulnerability Database as the CVEs, all of these CVEs refer to specific product versions, usually software versions or firmware versions. There are very few CVEs that refer to hardware products. And so that means if you want to know how many or which known vulnerabilities affect your installed base, you must have a very good understanding of what your installed base is when it comes to product versions, when it comes to installed software and firmware. Let's take a closer look at that. So here we are looking at the National Vulnerability Database at one specific entry. Everything, all the known vulnerabilities, the CVEs, are encapsulated, accessible in this database that is administered by NIST. So you just go to nvd.nist.gov and you will see all the vulnerabilities that are recorded there. At this time, it's about 250,000. And now your task will become to figure out which of those 250,000 vulnerabilities, and certainly the number is rising all the time, every day, which of these affect your installed base. So let's take a closer look at one specific example that I've pulled up for you. That's a vulnerability from 2018, and it's about PowerFlex drives. Oh, that doesn't sound good, right? PowerFlex, that's an actuator. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where energy, it's the factory floor. So, interesting vulnerability. The base core is 9.8 in CVSS version 3.x. That means that seems to be nasty stuff. But the more important point here, what I want to show you is, look at the description. This references a specific product, PowerFlex 525, version 5001. That's the important thing. So this tells us that these drives with firmware version 5001 or earlier are affected by this vulnerability. And that certainly then means, you must know where you have your PowerFlexes 525s and which firmware version they are running. Otherwise, you couldn't determine if you are affected by this vulnerability. But the other thing I want to point out is what really matters, the exact description of the affected configuration is down here, where it says known affected software configurations. And here you see a funny notation, which is what we call the CPEs, the Common Platform Enumerators. And that combination here refers to a hardware product, which is PowerFlex 525, and it refers to the firmware that is running on these products up to version 5001. Okay, that is the important piece when you think about automation. So the OT asset management software, which we'll switch over to in a second, only looks at this part down here, which is precise, whereas this description up here, this is intended for the human reader, and this is totally irrelevant for the software. Okay, now with that having said, let's look at the problem space that you're faced with. So in our OT base asset management software, we have gone to the vulnerability workspace, where you can see a list of all the vulnerabilities that affect our sample installed base. Let me move that around. Yeah, that's better. And our sample database of products is roughly 5,000 devices. And in this list, you see a listing of all the known vulnerabilities that affect this sample database, this sample base of OT assets. And the one number I want you to focus on is in the upper right corner. That's the total number of vulnerabilities that affect this installed base, and it's roughly 700,000. Now, this is a generally correct volume that you would expect in a, let's just say, mid-size manufacturing enterprise. You are talking about several hundred thousands of vulnerabilities, could be over 1 million if you think about a larger enterprise. That's a real number. That's not fake, not something, that's a real thing. And yeah, that's a bit discouraging, right? So that is something that you probably are not, that you had not expected. And usually if users see the whole magnitude of the mess, they tend to get discouraged, because everybody knows immediately, well, we will never be able to mitigate 700,000 vulnerabilities. That's impossible, even if you had an army, and if you had assigned the task to a sweatshop and they're doing nothing else. Because don't forget, this is your backlog. Every single day, new vulnerabilities also drop from the sky and add on to the problem. So how do we tackle this known problem? Well, that's very simple. If you have made the decision that you want to do / must do OT vulnerability management, and you know you can only do so much. Let's just say you estimate, well, probably we will be able to mitigate 50,000 of those vulnerabilities per year, which would be a lot. Then the question becomes, which of those 700,000 should that be? So which CVEs, if you mitigate them, would actually make a difference? Because if you don't have a plan and you just take a random subset of those 700,000, it is obvious that you won't get anywhere. So that's a waste of time. And you would fool yourself, maybe fool your management, that you would do anything of substance. You will not. And that is the core problem of vulnerability management in OT. How do you make that decision? In other words, how do you prioritize? So you want to make sure that with the capacity that you have, you will be able to make a difference when it comes to reducing the attack surface. And there are some, I would say, best practices how to make that happen. Usually what some people do is they focus on the CVE severity. They would they would limit the result set or the problem space to CVEs with the severity of critical. And I tell you why this is not a very good idea. If we switch over to a different table here, let me show you something. So now we're looking at CVEs, no longer at individual vulnerabilities. And in this table, if I say, well, I want to focus on the baddest stuff out that there is, right? So base score of 10, it doesn't get any worse. And look at that third column where the CVE severity is listed, okay? Now, isn't that interesting? So we have a bunch of CVEs with a base score of 10 and the severity is high. Okay, and that's quite a lot. And the simple reason is that the critical severity rating was introduced only a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2016, if I remember correctly. And before that, there was no critical severity, but certainly there was a CVSS base score of 10. So therefore, you would not want to use severity necessarily in OT to make your prioritization. You certainly could use the base score. So you could say, for example, anything with a base score like higher than 8. And that is what you would want to focus on. In our case, that reduces the result set to 200. Oh, excuse me. That reduces the result set to 200-something thousand. Also, not what I'm looking for. And the other problem associated with the CVSS base scores is, well, they are computed for IT scenarios, and that doesn't really translate very well to OT. So let me show you a way how you can tackle this problem. It all comes down to using effective criteria on how to reduce the result set to focus on the real nasty stuff that you want to prioritize. And basically what we're doing here, we are first focusing on the likelihood of exploitation. So where you would imagine, well, there are a couple thousand of those vulnerabilities in there that are more prone to exploitation than others. And I'll show you how that works. One of the most important filters that you want to use is to filter for CVEs with known exploits. There is a specific database where those are maintained by CISA, and that's the KEV database, which translates to known exploited vulnerability. In the OT-based OT management software, you can filter for these set of vulnerabilities just by checking this box up here, KEV only, okay? And what did we achieve by that? Oh, 23,000 and something, 23,000 and change. Sure, that definitely looks a lot better than compared to 700,000. So now I'm only looking at vulnerabilities with known exploits. And the reasoning here is, if there is a known exploit, the likelihood of exploitation in your site is higher than if the hackers would have to invent their own exploit first. Okay, but we can go much further in our prioritization. The next strategy or tactic that I want to show you is a filter that is referring to the attack vector. So what does that mean? NIST tells us specifically how an exploitation would need to be administered. And this is what you see reflected in this drop-down here. Okay, there are vulnerabilities out there where a physical presence at the device is necessary. Then there are other vulnerabilities where at least a local account presence is needed, and so on. The one thing that we definitely want to care about is those vulnerabilities that can be exploited remotely. And this is what you get here in this setting, okay? So we apply this filter and bang, we are down to 12,000 vulnerabilities. Oh, that gave us another big bang for the buck. So now everything that I see in here can be exploited remotely, and that should be high on my list. Then the second area here that we want to focus on is the attack complexity. That's another data item that NIST tells us in their CVE description, and we use that to our advantage. So what we want to focus on is vulnerabilities that can be exploited with a low attack complexity. Okay, and we just need to check this right here, and we are down to 7,712 vulnerabilities. So you get the point. Now we are talking. Now we get in business. Okay, so this really allows us to narrow down the problem space to something of substance, where I can figure out, well, this is the really nasty stuff. Those are vulnerabilities with a known exploit. The attack complexity is low and they can be remotely exploited. Okay, so this is something that I really want to worry about. And then I could even go further. Let me give you another example. I could focus on the device criticality, which we also have in this table right here. This is basically an assessment by a subject matter expert who has said, well, this device or this range of devices in that network, they are critical for our process. Could be safety critical, could be anything else. And you see that we have a column in this table. If you want to filter for devices that have any kind of criticality, we just use the underscore. And then everything that is not assessed as critical is moved away. And then you see our number goes down to 5,500 roughly. Okay, now this is definitely working to our favor. Now we know this is a result set that we definitely want to execute on because everything here affects critical devices. And by the way, in OT base, we are using a qualitative assessment or expression of criticality, so you can express why a particular system is critical. You could also say safety as an example, or business continuity. And then on top of that, you could also specify a quantitative assessment like very high or super high or whatever. But anyhow, so now we have a result set where you definitely want to make where you definitely want to execute your vulnerability management. And so now we are taking it to the next level. Now the question becomes, how do I go to mitigation? And for that, what we want to do is we want to silo the result set into various locations, various locales. Because in OT, mitigation is executed locally. So you cannot centrally deploy your patches as an example. That needs to be done locally by the control engineer in charge, who is responsible for this specific type of machines. So what we can do here is we just open our scopes filter here, and we can just pick a selection. Let's just say USA, one of our sample sites. Let's go to Charlotte, okay. And now I have 2,714 vulnerabilities, critical devices, known exploits, remotely exploitable, low attack complexity in Charlotte. And I want to assign this to our engineers in Charlotte so that they can start the mitigation. And I'll tell you how that is executed in the OT-based OT asset management software. So anything that you see here in this table and any filter setting that you have done can be saved. And this is done here in the Manage Views button. When I press this, I get this, this slider here, where I can just select any kind of name and then save this particular filter setting, okay? And as you see here, I've done that already, critical childhood vulnerabilities, in the interest of saving a little bit of time. And once that I've done that, I can easily load those up again. So if I want to load my result set for FlatRock, for which I've done the same thing, I just select that drop-down item, and then I get the results for for FlatRock, which in this case is 645. As soon as I've done that, I can then assign a remediation task. So this is a different area in OT base where you can add tasks and that you assign to specific people. So you see that I have done that already for 3 samples. We have our critical FlatRock vulnerabilities, our critical child vulnerabilities, and then also the PowerFlex. I get back to that later if time allows. So let me just show you rather quickly how you add a remediation task. So the major thing is that in this drop down here, you select any of those saved views that you have saved in the vulnerabilities table, okay? Anything that you have saved, you can load that in here, and then you can specify additional parameters, such as the priority. Is that something that needs to be addressed right now or later, or after all the highest pressing vulnerabilities are done? This is what you select here. And then you can also set a start date and an end date, and you can assign users like so. From the pool of users, you can assign it to those who are responsible at the local site. Okay. Once that you have done that, you also get some nice stats. So you see the start date and end date. You see the number of vulnerabilities that are left to remediate. And you also see the number of affected devices, which I think is very interesting, because, for example, here for our FlatRock example, with the critical FlatRock vulnerabilities, we see, well, we have roughly 650 vulnerabilities, but it affects only 13 devices. That is good news, because that's a low number of devices, and that gives me the idea, well, no, I really have a shot at this, because 13 devices, I mean, I can apply my system hardening, my patching for 13, that should be doable. And at the same time, I'm very confident that with all those vulnerabilities that we are talking about here, I will actually make a difference, because they come with known exploits, the devices are critical, attack complexity is low, and remotely exploitable. Okay, and once that I do a double click on any of these remediation tasks, it looks like this, where you see start date, end date, and a timeline here. You see the number of remaining vulnerabilities, number of devices that are affected, and the V-score, that's a computed value that won't go in here. But you can see here, for example, in that timeline, that something was done already. Okay, so somebody has already knocked down a couple of vulnerabilities. Certainly what you want to see is that this diagram really goes down to 0. Here again is your vulnerability listing, so anything that's still left to remediate. Then we have the affected devices, like so. Anytime I want to do a drill down, well, you just click on the device ID, and you see a device profile, and from there, I mean, you get all the data that you need down here in the security section. Yeah, that is a shit show here that we see, all those critical vulnerabilities with known exploits, blah, blah, blah. But, now this is another part where I think this becomes really, really interesting, because this tells me right away, as probably one of the people who are responsible for this machine, well, wait a second, we have all this critical stuff here, and if I go through the descriptions, there are a bunch of vulnerabilities that affect an outdated Chrome version. That's good news, because it tells me, well, maybe if I update Chrome on this machine, or just get rid of Chrome, then a bunch of vulnerabilities will be gone. So that is very good news for my remediation. Then we have the CVEs, a number of affected devices, and so on. And finally, the assigned users. Okay, so that gives me a lot of space to work with. And well, we won't go through the other examples here because I think you get the point. The other thing I would like to show you in closing is once that you have saved such a vulnerability filter set, this automatically also generates a report. And then if you go to the reporting section in OT-Base, you see all of the reports that have been automatically created, and you can assign those to the dashboard widgets, so what I've done already. And you see basically also the same trends reflected. So you can see here as an example, this is the trend line in the background, and you know there were some mitigations did already occur. So some of those vulnerabilities have already been knocked down. Anytime you want to see the full report, you just do a double click, and you have seen that graph earlier. And from there, you will also see the affected devices and any charts that give me additional pointers. So that might take us a couple of seconds to load. But this is something that you don't need to create extra. You don't need to assemble those reports as an example. So this is all generated automatically. And we don't want to wait for this guy to finish. And this gives you an idea how a powerful OT asset management system really gives you an angle at effective OT vulnerability management. Means that with the little capabilities that you have, it's not just you, it's everybody. So everybody in OT security is totally understaffed. That means you must be able to use some kind of automation. And this is what I wanted to show you in the OT-based OT asset management software. You have quite a substantial amount of automation for OT vulnerability management. You get the automatic matching of the CVEs to your installed base. This is updated daily, every 24 hours. So when you go to the events page, as an example, you will see the new vulnerabilities, right, that just popped in over the last 24 hours. And that is all done automatically. And from there, as I showed you, the workspace with that listing, that is all done automatically. The couple of things that you want to do manually is things like assigning a device criticality. This is something that the software cannot know, how important a specific device is for the production process. This is what an SME needs to provide. But then the software can put everything together and really give you the advantage that now you have the visibility to see where things make a difference, where you would want to focus your vulnerability management efforts. And maybe the last thing that I would like to point out, the benefit that you have with this OT asset management software is that it's all based on a very detailed and accurate OT asset inventory. So that's the foundation for pretty much everything that you do in OT asset management. Because as I told you earlier, every single CVE is tied to a specific software version. If you don't know the version, you are left in the blind or in the opaque, if you will. So you must have an accurate OT asset inventory. Once that you have that, things become comparatively easy because then the matching can be done automatically. And then the next thing is going to be, oh shit, 700,000 vulnerabilities for our installed base. We will never be able to work through that. And you're absolutely right about that. So that leads you to the question, how can we reduce the problem space to something we can handle, and in a way that will allow us to actually make a difference, to substantially reduce our attack surface. Okay, that's basically what I wanted to cover in this webinar. let's see if we have some questions. I take this one right here. From Ricardo, does OTBase give you the link to the respective supplier of the patch to close the vulnerability? I would, in a way, yes, I would say, and let me tell you what I mean by this. So for Microsoft products, for example, you will see all the KBs exposed in the vulnerability description. So in what we call the vulnerability profile. And you will see that list right away. For other products, let me get back to my example with the PowerFlex variable frequency drives. We will point to the vendor's product page where you will be able to download the latest firmware version. Okay, so this is an example that I couldn't show in the interest of time today. Maybe we will come back to that next week in our. Remember, so this is a weekly series. Don't miss next week and the following week. So stay with us. We will go to any detail, and certainly, especially based on viewer feedback. So we're happy to engage with you in a discussion. And maybe I leave it with that. So yes, it does point out the link. It does point out what you need to do for the mitigation. And we might pick this up again next week. I hope to see you all there. Share the link if you can. Those live streams are recorded, so they're available on LinkedIn and on YouTube and on X. So if you want to check out anything later, just go back there, and also share the link if you want to others who you think might benefit from the discussion. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Bye-bye.